Good afternoon, everyone. This is your instructor, Enrique, and today we're going to dive into the first concept you need to master in this class, which is rhetorical analysis. And to understand rhetorical analysis, we have to understand what is the rhetorical triangle, how the audience plays a role, and the situation introduction. In today's lessons, we're going to analyze whether a political speech, an advertisement, which is one of your first assignments, or even a social media post, how those everything plays and uses rhetoric to become a better reader and a persuasive writer. So, what is rhetorical analysis? It is the process of examining how authors construct arguments to influence their audiences. Instead of just asking, what does this say? We ask, how does this work? What does the author make the specific choices on voice, on tone, on specific sentence? And for that, we have to go back all the way to ancient Greece, with Aristotle's appeals. The foundation of rhetorical analysis rests on three key aspects. First, they were identified by Aristotle as ethos, which is credibility or ethics. And what is it? It is the speaker's credibility, character, and trustworthiness. How does it work? Authors establish ethos by demonstrating expertise, showing good character, or connecting with shared values with the audience. For example, a doctor discussing healthcare recommendations, citing reputable sources and statistics, sharing personal experience relevant to the topic, or using professional language and proper grammar. Anyways, if a doctor, a cardiothoracic surgeon whose job is to do heart transplants, starts talking about how to change the oil in a car, his appeal to authority may not be there because you got to think about this. What is he trying to get at? Is he trying, to his reputation online? Maybe he is a great mechanic, but just the fact that he's a physician does not make him an expert in mechanics, car mechanics. So always, when you're looking at ethos, look at not just who the speaker is and their credentials, but what is the subject. There's a correlation between the two. Now, so that's the first example. The next is, these are the questions you have to ask. What makes the author qualified to speak on this topic? Again, going back to the doctor, is it because he's talking about medicine, or is he talking about car mechanics that he has SEA certification? And does that authority would establish trust with their audience? What credentials or experiences do they mention? Next is something that you see it all the time, which is pathos, emotional appeal. And pathos appeals to the audience's emotions, values, and beliefs. Authors use pathos to create emotional connections that motivate action or agreement. Think of your favorite novel or movie, and there's a vivid storytelling and personal anecdotes, emotional language, and imagery. They appeal to fear, hope, pride, or compassion, music, visual elements, and multimedia text. Ask, what emotion is the author trying to evoke? How do the word choices create emotional responses? What about their, because you guys are eventually going to analyze a TED Talk. Also look at the visuals. How are the visuals impacting this? And lastly, for the rhetorical triad, we have to look at logos. What is it? Logos appeals to logic, reason, and evidence, but again, it's subject specific. Authors use logo to build rational arguments through facts, statistics, examples, and clear reasoning. Again, keep in mind that it has to relate to the subject. In a clinical paper, you will look at statistical data, research findings, an organization that makes coherent and makes sense, cause and effect relationships, or expert testimony and factual evidence during a trial. Think about what evidence does the author provide. What is the argument? How is the argument logically structured? Are there any logical fallacies present? The most important part, though, of any rhetorical analysis is understanding the audience. Still, the audience is arguably the most relevant factor in any rhetorical analysis. Authors shape every aspect of their message based on who they're trying to reach. Again, going back to the earlier example of a physician, it wouldn't make sense for a physician to establish himself and all the credibility about his next transplant, heart transplant, if he's talking to lay individuals. The talk is just going to go way over their head. Or if he's talking to the mechanics of how a car works to a group of physicians. But that doesn't mean that there are different types of audiences, right? And those audiences are also going to dictate how the analysis is presented. So if the physician is talking to a group of his colleagues, right, then he has to use that professional language. He has to use statistics and cite to all credible sources. So that'll be the primary audience, the intended readers, viewers. Secondary audiences are others who might encounter the text logically. If he's talking about saying, "Hey, you got to eat more sugar to have high, to improve the health." Now, I'm using something that, as we know so far in the body of language, doesn't make any sense. But let's assume that the person is doing that. Then, is he trying to change policy, public policy? Is he trying, or she, is the doctor trying to change public opinion? And then you look at the audience itself. Are they hostile? Are they a neutral audience? Are they a friendly audience? That are going likely to agree with the author. Questions to consider. Who's the intended audience? What does the audience already know about the topic? What are their values, beliefs, concerns? What kind of language and tone will resonate with them? How might the audience demographics, age, education, culture influence the author's choices? And then we're going to now look at the evidence of audience awareness, level of technical language use, cultural references and examples, assumption about prior knowledge, choice of publication platform. So, and finally, we're going to look at the actual situation. The rhetorical situation is the context in which communication occurs. It includes the specific circumstances that prompted the author to write and the constraints they face. Some of the components are the exigency, so the urgent issue. What problem or issue prompted this communication? Why did the author take the time to write this paper or create this speech? What limitations? Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Why is this message needed right now? That is the last question you have to ask. Then you look at constraints and opportunities. What limitations does the author face? Time, space, medium, audience expectations. What advantages or opportunities can they leverage? How do these factors shape the message? Purpose. What does the author want to accomplish? Are they trying to inform, persuade, entertain, or inspire action? How does the purpose influence their strategy? And then you're going to look at contextual factors. The historical moment. When was this created? What was happening in the world? Think about MLK giving the speech in the 1960s at the height of the civil rights movement. How would that play out 20, 30 years, or even today? What cultural values and norms influence the message? How does the format, essay, speech, video, social media shape the message? Institutional context. What organizational platforms behind this message? Now let's put it all together. When analyzing any rhetorical text, work through the steps questions systematically. First, identify a situation. What prompted the communication? Where and where? When and where? What is the author's purpose? Next, analyze the audience. Who's the intended audience? What are their characters, values, and needs? How does the author adapt to this audience? Examine the appeals. How does the author establish credibility, ethos? What emotional appeals are used? Pathos. What logical evidence is provided? Logos. Now you're going to evaluate how the author is effective. How will the rhetorical strategies match the situation and audience? What makes the argument persuasive or unpersuasive? What could the author have done differently? Now, we'll do a practice example, and we're going to analyze a public service announcement. Let's briefly consider how you might analyze a PSA about texting and driving. Situation: rising concern about distracted driving accidents involving young people. Audience: primarily texting teenagers and young adults. Ethos: statistics from traffic safety organizations, testimonials from accident survivors. Pathos: emotional stories of accidents, images of crashed cars, appeals to protecting loved ones. Logos: data on accident rates, clear cause and effects relationship between texting and crashes. Now, you will practice in the one of the first for this week. I posted a simple analysis. I'm only going to looking for 100 to 200 words for this first example, and it's a social media post. Go through this systematically, analyze it, asking the same questions that we have previously asked. So start with the situation, the audience, examine the appeals, such as ethos, pathos, and logos, and evaluate the effectiveness. So, in conclusion, rhetorical analysis is a powerful tool that helps you understand how communication works in the world around you. By examining the rhetorical triangle, audience and situation, you'll become more critical consumers of media, more effective communicators yourself, and you'll understand when you've been manipulated and for what purposes. Remember, no author is ever without everyone has a purpose. Every text is crafted for a specific audience in a specific situation. What I'm doing in this case, instead of giving you a Word document, I chose to record a video. So for next class, begin looking for examples of your rhetoric in your daily life. go to discussion boards. I have posted some discussions to start help prompting our brains to get in prime. Because on week 2, you're going to craft an outline because you're going to analyze a TEDx talk. And the week after that, you actually have to do the full paper because we're in a 10-week class. All the timelines are extremely compressed. Thank you and have a great day.